All right, everyone, welcome back to Faith Infused Leadership. I am your co-host, Meredith Banka, here with our host, Debbie Heiser of Three Vines Consulting. And today we're really pleased to be welcoming a special guest to the show. So Debbie, would you like to make the introduction for us?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm very grateful that Dr. Horseman, also known as Jack, has decided to join us today and that we can pick his brain a little bit on his experiences that he has had in leadership and particularly in the servant leadership. Just how we act in the world with servant leadership. So Jack, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So Jack, if you don't mind, just to start out, can you maybe enlighten us a little bit on your history and how you kind of stepped into leadership, what you're doing today, and what kind of your future holds for that?
Well, that goes back a long way. I grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan. I'm a Canadian. And I farmed for 13 years. And I set up, while I was farming, I was also very involved in entrepreneurship. And I set up a dealer organization across the province of Saskatchewan. And I would say from a leadership perspective, what I learned from the entrepreneurial experience is that relationships come before product. Mm-hmm. And dealing with people's problems, the first thing that needs to be done is to work on the relationship and then deal with the problem. And that's kind of what my strategy arose out of that. I farmed for 13 years and then I had a major accident and reevaluated my life and decided to go back to school to try to figure out what life was all about, what was important. And in doing that, I went to school for about 10 years in total, undergraduate, graduate, and doctorate. And I think going to school, later in my life, I went back to school at 32, it was about going through identity shifts. And I think that was important because I was going from a farmer to a university student to emerging teacher. And those identity shifts are important, I think, as far as human development, transformation, ongoing learning, change, dealing with changes are really important that we make the shift. I mean, I still consider myself at root a farmer, but I am also a teacher and I'm also a lifelong learner. And opening ourselves up to those kinds of changes in our identity and who we are. And now I'm retired, and that's a whole new emerging identity of who I am and what I'm going to do and be in the world, and the way of being in the world. And those shifts are important that we reflect on them and we add to who we are. Not deny where we've been, but add to who we are in positive ways. I think that's been important. As a university professor, I started out teaching business. I taught at a native college, all native college on Vancouver Island. I taught in the Middle East. I taught at other university settings in British Columbia. And then I went back to Gonzaga. I started out with a lot of my schooling at Gonzaga University. And I went back there and I found I was home. In the sense that I fit there and I could flourish there. And I think it's really important for leaders to be able to admit where they're not flourishing and move towards where they can flourish. And what that is, what creates that flourishing where you feel like, I'm home, where I can nurture my gifts and I can be passionate about what I do. And so that's kind of the base. The thing about developing relationship, being open to changing identity, and seeking where we flourish. I think those are really, really important in leadership development. And knowing where we're not flourishing and being able to make decisions that move towards what is healthy for us, what gives us life. And usually, in my experience, when I wasn't flourishing, I was doing things against my core values. And it takes a lot of awareness and reflection to keep going back to what are my core values? What are the values that create flourishing in myself, in my work, in my family, and there's continuous review of what those values are and how I understand them, and more importantly, how I live them out or act them out with others. And so that's how I kind of was drawn to, I think, servant leadership and Robert Greenleaf's notion of serving first goes right to the heart of relationship with the other, and that I can grow, realizing that I grow more when I am available and serve others than serve myself. And when I'm serving myself, that is a key fundamental value shift. I think that is foundational and profound in that it sets the context for all leadership. And so that's kind of a little bit of background. Where I'm at now as a retired professor, I am working with Jesuit Worldwide Aviation, and it's designed for people living on the margins, people in refugee camps, people who have no other means of education. And we are right now have groups in Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, and we're offering these courses to them. And I'm so amazed that they are just students like everybody else trying to get along in the world. And it's very rewarding. So I'm kind of doing that as a gift back.
Well, that was one of the questions that your introduction made me think of is, I know our internet connections today are a little bit unstable, so we'll see if we can you hear us, Dr. Horseman?
Oh, I'm getting frozen again.
Yes, that might happen. So if you can hear us, then the question that Debbie and I were thinking of, you've had the opportunity to teach in so many different places, and you just commented that these students that you're finding in these refugee camps, they're just like students everywhere else. Did you see similarities through your travels and leadership as well, that leaders in one place are embodying the same core skills, I guess I would say, as in other places?
That's a great question, because the environment where people function and do their work can change tremendously. And that goes back to why I became so interested in human development models, the different stages of human development as a framework, as a background for understanding leadership. And the stages of development basically go from a focus on egocentrism to a greater focus on ethnocentrism to increasingly more openness and inclusivity. And so in many places, the leadership styles in the different countries and organizations can vary from very hierarchical, very autocratic, to very inclusive and collaborative, depending on the background and the environment of the organization. And servant leadership can function in all of those environments, providing a person has an understanding of the human development and the values that people are trying to live out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective to have, because I then find myself wondering how there's similarities or differences when it comes to faith intersecting with leadership. the way that you just expressed that environment intersects with leadership. What are your thoughts there when different faith backgrounds come together in leadership situations?
Well, I fundamentally believe that all profound transformational changes happen at the spiritual level first. And then they work through our knowledge and the way we relate to others, and even through our physicality of how we present ourselves in the world. And so I've taught students from all walks of life, all faith backgrounds, and I've never, ever had difficulty. I don't promote a specific religion. I'm Catholic, I'm Christian Catholic, and I'm very, very influenced by the Jesuits and the Benedictines, but I've never found a problem when the focus is on the values that we're trying to model, and the values and the skills that go with them that we're trying to demonstrate to the students. And so when we talk about those kinds of values, I find that those values show up in almost every religious background, every religious context, mm-hmm. and they're the same human values that create human flourishing. Mm-hmm. And so I don't deal with the specifics of religion, but I do deal with human values that create human flourishing. And for example, with the peace leader, just in that context, many of the students have come out of very, very embattled situations, civil war, and with all the things that go with that. But the notion of peace and yearning for peace, I think the yearning for a healthy, collaborative community, we all have, and a place where we can heal and grow, and we can model values of respect. Even when I disagree strongly with you, I can still respect you for your views. And so that profound respect for the other, for myself and the other, I think is foundational to beginning what we talk about in the Peace Leader program. And when I found that teaching online is so interesting, because once the courses are developed, they can go anywhere in the world, and it's the same, and the students respond in similar ways from everywhere in the world that I've experienced. And so it's the design and the presentation of the course that is really, really important. But beyond, underneath that, it is the fundamental methodology and approach that deals with these human values that I think are really important, and building of the skills that go with them.
Can you give us it's so interesting. I'm wondering if you have an example that you could share, maybe where you were pleasantly surprised with the way that some of that curriculum was received by one of your online students, where you kind of had that moment where you thought, oh my gosh, there are similarities here.
Well, there's lots of different examples. I think early on in teaching online, one of the biggest surprises, what do we do in the servant leadership class is at the beginning, we ask students to go out and interview a leader and then compare what that leader spoke about to the values of servant leadership. And when you ask people what is good leadership, they know. And they know what bad leadership is, or coercive, manipulative leadership. They know what that is, what it feels like to be treated in a coercive, manipulative way. And they know what it feels like when people are concerned about who they are and work towards developing their skills and abilities. And I think the biggest surprise I got was from military people in the Gonzaga program who, like, for example, Air Force people who, they just took to servant leadership they knew exactly what I was talking about because they know who their good leaders are. And in life and death situations, they know who cares about them and who doesn't. And so I was surprised that the military people would respond to servant leadership as positively as they did. Yeah, because basically they're many situations they're in a very authoritarian, autocratic, do this kind of a situation, but they still know the intentions of their leaders and who respect them and who don't. So that was a big surprise. Another example is people who have come out of very abusive situations, who come online, join a course, and if they're brave enough and feel safe enough to begin revealing some of their experiences, it's how quickly that speaking our truths is healing. We heal when we are able to name and reveal, maybe just to one other person. And when we listen to what someone is speaking and respond in such a way that we're communicating that we're hearing, if for some way, that respect of listening is so important that it has a healing component to it, I believe. And so one of my courses that I developed was Listen, Discern, Decide. And it's all about learning to listen. Not in the way of, punching all the right buttons, but in a very generative, holistic way. And which I think is a transformational way of listening. What I call generative listening, and I got a whole spiel on
that. Yeah, and Jack, I would say one of the big things that I learned from you about listening and through the coursework was this idea of this generative, holistic listening. It's not only listening externally, but quieting ourselves down enough to listen internally. One of the exercises in that course is that every morning you spend, I want to say it was 15 minutes at least, in quiet, in silence, just listening to the internal state of your body, your mind, your soul, that type of thing. And I guess I would ask you, when did that become apparent to you? Because some people are very aware of that in just life in general, and other people, it's a learned practice.
Well, that's a great question. Learning a spiritual discipline or a discipline of what I call internal listening, or being silent, or listening to silence, listening to listening. It's a discipline that has developed intermittently over many years. I would say I've been doing some form of meditation for 25 years or so, sporadically, but now it's kind of a routine, on a daily routine. And that just taking a few moments, like 20 minutes or 15 minutes to listen internally, I find that the whole trajectory of my day will be different as a result of doing that. And so I've encouraged students to do that every day also. What it does is the interior landscape is somehow is an expression of exterior, what is in the world. So how we view ourselves and experience ourselves internally it gets represented in how we view the world. And so it's taking some time to do the internal listening. We get intuitions, we get ideas, we get creative inspiration. I think is very, very important for healing and transformational development. And if we don't do the internal work, what we're doing on the outside, I think, is closer to manipulation than it is authenticity. So we need to be doing our own work first and challenging ourselves on reviewing how we've been doing and making or resolving to make course corrections from our internal self. So that the reflective part of it is key, and because it makes us more aware.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, Jack, because when I think about even the characteristics of servant leadership, and I think about awareness and listening, and then I immediately go to healing. And in order to move in this human development and progress in human development, it's really, in my opinion, that ability to go internally and do some healing, but then also having the awareness and, to your point earlier, the intention of serving other people to help provide space for them to heal. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I believe that whenever we are interacting with ourselves or with others, there are two processes going on. And one is healing and the other is learning. Healing and learning are two aspects of the same thing. And one involves letting go and the other involves letting come. And a lot of times that learning process, if we have one without the other, we get distortions. And I think I learned this teaching at the native school, where students were coming from a lot of abusive backgrounds. And I would find that they would learn what we were, they really grasp and become excited about learning and whatever we were teaching. And then they would stop and they would have to heal, maybe for a couple of days, maybe for a couple of weeks. And once they got that work through, then they could come back and they could concentrate on the learning again. And so the healing and the learning are two aspects of the same thing. And Bernard Lonergan really had a good description of that as one is love about letting go, is letting go, and the other is creative learning, which arises from everything that we know. So we got to be open to let go of what we think we know, and at least hold it in abeyance. And we need to also hold our strong emotional convictions of who we think we are lightly also, and redirect and focus on the other person. And we need to be willing to change our very identity. And those are three things that we need to hold loosely while we are trying to learn something or create something that is new. And that's very, very at the heart of transformational change, I believe. It's letting go and letting come. And being willing to be there in that space of not knowing what is coming or what we have to let go of is a place of vulnerability. It's a place that many people do not want to be for very long. And we shouldn't be there very long, actually, because it's this vulnerable state. But we need to be there often. And so this going back to this thing of meditation or taking 15 minutes of silence and listening to ourselves is kind of opening up that part of ourselves where we are receptive to letting go, being willing to let go even of our ideas and our views, and let something new emerge. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, profound to transformational growth and change, not only personally, but organizationally.
Wow, that is incredible to think about how that is playing into this work that you're doing internationally and online, right? With the idea of helping individuals to heal, to listen, and just to see how that is going to evolve is going to be very, very interesting. And so I think we were going to try to bring you back onto the video, Dr. Horseman, and see if we could just grab some final thoughts today. So I think I may have sent you a little request that you can click that will ask your permission to come back onto the video. We paused that for a minute because our connections were a little garbled, but I know that listening to you today and having you share with us these foundational ideas has just been fantastic. Now, Debbie, if someone wanted to learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing and how Dr. Horseman's ideas play into that, where would they go to learn more about what you do?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I would head out to my website at www.3v as in Victor consulting.com, and that is spelled out 3. You can go out there. There's all sorts of information out there. There's also links. I would also say Dr. Horseman has a book about servant leadership that is fantastic, and many resources that he has created throughout time, I would say, and those can be found even if you just Google. So I would recommend that too if you have more interest in Dr. Horseman's work as well.
Well, great. I want to thank you, Dr. Horseman, for spending your time with us today and sharing everything that you have. We really appreciate you. And for this episode of Faith Infused Leadership, I am your co-host, Meredith Benka, here with your host, Debbie Heiser, and we will see you again the next time.
Thank you, Jack.